So we're starting Parsha Emor. There's a lot more to do in Kedoshim, but we have to move on. In Parsha Emor 672. Now, can I ask you, is anybody here a Kohen? Nobody here is a Kohen? No Kohanim here? Besides me. Besides me, nobody's a Kohen. I mean, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, nobody's a Kohen, huh? Okay. So the Parsha says, look, we're never supposed to say that we like one part of Torah more than another. You're not supposed to say like, but I do have a special fondness for this Parsha. This is the Parsha of the Kohanim. Emor is the Parsha of Kohanim. And there's been a progression here. We'll see this progression where first the Torah told us the difference between Jews and non-Jews, where it talked about the foods we could eat and not eat, what the other nations are allowed to eat, what we're not allowed to eat. Then the Torah tells us now the difference between a Yisrael, regular Jews, and Kohanim, irregular, the special Jews. And then the Torah tells the difference now between Kohanim and Kohen Gadol. Right, so there are different degrees. Okay, so that's what this parsha is about. Now, the first thing that the Torah is going to go into is the laws of ritual impurity, and the if you take a look from the beginning, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe Emor el haKohanim b'nei Aaron v'amarta aleihem lenefesh lo yitama ba'amov. Hashem says to Moshe, say the Kohanim, and you shall say to them, which obviously begs the question of why are you repeating it? Right? Say to the Kohanim, and you shall say to them, L'nefesh lo yitam amav, they're now to come into contact with a dead body. Now, the long and short of the laws of Tuma, we're not going to go into all the subtleties of Tuma, but a body, when somebody dies, it communicates a ritual. What we call Tuma is generally translated as ritual impurity. That's the translation for Tuma. And a Kohen is not allowed to come into contact with a dead body other than his next of kin. Father, mother, wife, son, daughter, brother, sister, if she's not married. Kohen there are 7 family members that he's not only allowed to come into contact with, but he must come into contact with to get them buried. The extension of Tuma, it could be communicated from a dead body through either physical contact, being under the same roof as a dead body, if a person under the same roof as a dead body, or even if a person hovers over the dead body. Now, some of you may have seen on Bar Ilan Street, as you approach the cemetery there on the corner of right on the corner of Shmuel Navi and Bar Ilan, there's a cemetery. If you look on the wall there's actually a sign, a metal sign that is screwed to the wall that says Kohanim should not walk next to the wall because there's an overhang of the trees from the cemetery. So, for example, if this is the grave, and this is the tree, so the ritual impurity, and again, I'm not going to go into all the details, so don't ask me. I'm just giving you an example. The ritual impurity goes up, the tree becomes a roof for it, and anything under this part of the roof is also tameh. Now, this affects Kohanim in many areas. It affects Kohanim in going into hospitals. In Shari Tzedek Hospital, there's actually a sign that says Kohanim may or may not enter. If somebody dies in the hospital until they move the body, a Kohen can't go into the hospital. In America, it's actually more lenient because a non-Jewish body does not have the same degree of impurity as a Jewish body. And so, in an American hospital where you can rely on the majority being not Jewish, so a Kohen could go into the hospital as long as he doesn't come into physical contact with the body. Whereas in Israel, the majority in the hospitals. Now, the truth of the matter is that there are those Kohanim that are lenient and they enter Hadassah Hospital because the place is flooded with Arabs, and it could very well be that, and we certainly hope that the majority of the dead in the hospital are Arabs. Right, as opposed to Jews. No, I mean let's call a spade. You hope for your family. You want better for your family than certainly for your enemies. So there are those that rely on that leniency. That's the long and short of the. I don't want to go into the laws. I don't want to go into the laws of ritual. I can only tell you that as a Kohen, which I don't know if I mentioned, I am a Kohen. Again, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying. Anybody a Levi? Okay, Mayor, you can wash my hands if you're good. We'll make you a candidate to vie for the privilege. What do you call it? My son's got it good because my son is a Kohen. Well, he's my son. His father-in-law is a Levi. Could you imagine the joy of having your father-in-law wash your hands? He's also an Arsenal fan. He's an Arsenal, so yes, he's suffering right now. Dave, you out there? What do you call it? The Kohen is what do you call it? So a Kohen has these limitations. Okay, that's the basic idea over here. Now, the first question we have to deal with is why does the Torah repeat it? Why does the Torah say Emor el HaKohanim b'nei Aaron ve'amarta alehem? Now take a look at Rashi, the first Rashi on the page, 672, top right column. Emor el HaKohanim. Emor ve'amarta. Rashi immediately jumps on this. That is the double terminology of Emor, you shall say, ve'amarta, and you shall say. Lehazir gidolim al haketanim. To warn the adult Kohanim that the minor Kohanim also have to be supervised and not come into contact with dead bodies. Now remember, a lot of this had to do in the old days when there was Truma, and you had to be tahor. In order, a Kohen had to be tahor to eat Truma, so it was certainly a concern. But the question the commentaries go into over here is, we don't find this anywhere else in the Torah. You don't find by any other prohibition, maybe, if we open the door over there, the windows, doors get a little oxygen. We don't find anywhere in the Torah that the Torah says you're not allowed to eat pork, and you have to make sure that the adults supervise the children either. You don't find that anywhere. You do have to supervise it. We don't find a Torah warning. You don't find this double terminology of Emor ve'amarta. Say to the Jewish people they can't do this, they can't do that, they can't do the other, but it doesn't say to the Jewish people and you shall say to them. And Rashi says over here the emphasis is to teach that the adults have to supervise the children. Now why over here by the Kohanim where it comes to ritual, and by the way, you know where this applies? For example, when my kids were in school here. So, in America on Lag BaOmer, did you guys ever go on a Lag BaOmer outing in America? You know where we used to go on Lag BaOmer outings? We used to go, every Lag BaOmer, the day schools had an outing. So we used to either go to a park and play baseball, or you go to a baseball game, or you go to an amusement park. That was or a picnic. That was the outing. In Israel, they go to graves, right? In Israel, you go to cemeteries. You either go to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, or you go to the Sanhedrin graves, or you go to the Kever Rachel. Everything in Israel, that's the amusement is going to cemeteries. So as a father, I had to call the cheder where my kids were learning, but when my sons were in school. And I had to tell the Rabbi, by the way, when you go to these various cemeteries, on the course of the day, my kids can't go into the cemetery. That's part of the responsibility of a father. You can't. They have to be supervised. So here the Torah says, and this is what the commentaries say. Well, why here? What about when it comes to non-kosher food? What about immorality? What about shotness? What about all the prohibitions? Why doesn't it emphasize parents have to supervise their kids? What's the answer? The answer is because there's something unique over here. This is a unique prohibition. It's a prohibition that only applies to Kohanim. So when it comes to not eating pork or not eating bugs, so your kid is playing with all the other kids on the block, none of them are going to go eat bugs. But what if your kid is playing with a bunch of other kids, your kid's a Kohen, and now they're playing hide and seek in a cemetery, right? So the kids are going to run in. Well, he's going to do what his friends do. And therefore, you, the father, have to make sure that your son does not get dragged along with the others and what do you call it? And end up in a cemetery or whatever it is, because he's going to do what his friends do. It's a very unique prohibition. It's a prohibition that only relates to certain people and not other people, as opposed to all the other prohibitions of the Torah, which are across the board for all the Jewish people. Therefore, the Torah says, Emor ve'amarta, specific what he calls. So I started telling you before, as a Kohen, I have other issues. For instance, travel for a Kohen is not simple, because when a Kohen gets on a plane, planes coming to Israel often bring bodies to be buried in Israel. To go to America is not an issue. Nobody's leaving Israel to be buried in America. It's not like, oh yeah, I want to be buried in Pittsburgh. It's not like that's a major place for burial. But when people who pass away in America want to be buried in Israel. So El Al, is the major carrier, which obviously means that there's a lot of money in this. And they bring bodies on the plane. Now, if there's a body on the plane, the whole plane is tameh. So the Kohen cannot be sitting on the plane where there's a body. So one of the things we had to do if I would fly El Al, which I haven't in a while because of this problem, primarily this problem. I don't mind the service on El Al. I like the service on El Al. It's nice. Plus I get a minyan. The problem is that if I'm flying out of a major Jewish community, then I have to call cargo at El Al to find out if there's going to be a body on the plane. So if they tell me, no, tonight's flight doesn't have a body, so then I could get on the plane. The problem is they don't know until about 2 hours before the plane takes off. And that happened to me. We used to go, it happened to me, I was traveling with my family, and I had to call and keep calling, and eventually I find out, yes, there is a body, and now I got to make alternative plans. It's a hassle. So now I fly United. And United, now you're not going to believe the problems you could run into over here. I once called in England. I was actually coming back from England, and at the time I was also flying El Al, and I called cargo, and I want to know as early as possible if I have to start making alternative plans. So I called at about 1 in the afternoon. I said, "Hi, I'm a Kohen. Are there going to be bodies on tonight's plane?" The guy says to me, "No, as of now, there are not." I called again, and a couple hours later, he said, "No." Then I finally called again. I guess the guy had enough of me. He goes, "Yes, there will be 200 bodies, all of them alive." And so there was, okay. So I got, okay. But after that, I started switching because it's just too much. It's just too much of a hassle. Then there was a new problem. It's remarkable. Have you guys ever seen? There's a picture, if you go on, there's a picture of a guy sitting on a plane in a plastic bag.
I saw that.
If you say, okay, so let me explain to you I'll explain the background. You're not going to believe it. I'll explain to you what the background of the picture is. The background of this picture is there was a guy who was attending a shir. It was a Baal Tshuva. And they were studying in this shir. He became a Baal Tshuva, and he was studying in the shir the concept of a box being suspended over a cemetery, over a grave, in which case this box suspended over the grave is tameh, and everything inside the box becomes tameh. And the teacher, the Rabbi, giving the shir, he said an example nowadays would be a plane flying over a cemetery. So this guy said, well, he was a former El Al pilot, or he was a current pilot. He said, oh, well, we take off from the airport in Tel Aviv. When the plane hits 800 meters, they're over the cemetery in Cholon. There's a cemetery in Cholon, and the plane leaving the airport takes off over Cholon. So that created a crisis for Kohanim who want to leave the country. Because even if it's only for 10 seconds, how long does it take for a plane flying over a cemetery to cross past a cemetery? I think it's 20 seconds. Even for those, you can't be on the plane. So you don't have to jump off the plane if you're on it, but you're not allowed to get on the plane if you didn't know. So this created an entire, and it turned out that first of all, to go to Europe, there was no way out. All planes flying to Europe were going over to cemetery. I remember it was around Pesach time. There were guys from Mir Yeshiva who had to go home for Pesach, and so what they were doing is they were taking boats to Cyprus and picking up a plane in Cyprus to go fly home because they couldn't fly out of the country. To get to the United States, only a 747 at night. The 747s at night were routed around it because apparently the noise factor. So they were routed around. So I had to go to the United States. Now, somebody realized that there's a halachic, and don't ask me again what the halach is. I'm just talking about the halacha is. The halacha says that if an item is in a sealed container inside that box, which is over the cemetery, in a sealed container, then that item does not become tameh. So a Kohen figured out that if he gets on the plane and he puts himself into a container of some sort, right, so then he will not become tameh. Now, Blake, you're laughing. The truth is stranger than fiction. The problem is, what kind of container could you use to get on a plane? You can't take a big garbage pail on the plane with you, so what are you going to do? So some guy figured out that a container, a body bag, constitutes a container, a big plastic bag. The only question here, according from the halacha, in other words, all poskim hold by the concept that the container inside the container protects you. The only question is whether a big plastic bag constitutes a legitimate container, and there were poskim that said yes. Okay, so there's a guy gets on the plane. don't ask any questions, okay? I don't want to get technical with it. The guy gets on the plane, locks himself on takeoff. He had somebody seal the plastic bag. And then by the time he finishes getting over the cemetery, it said that by that point you can open the plastic bag, and is assuming he hasn't asphyxiated himself, he should be okay. Otherwise everybody on the plane's in trouble. So that's why the guy was there. Okay. So now I had to get out of the country. I had to get out of the country to do an event for Ohr Somayach. We were doing an event across the country, United States. And I was worried only about one thing. I was booked on an El Al flight, a night flight on a 747. I only had one problem. If at the last minute they find there's a problem with the plane, they may switch the plane to a smaller plane. Sometimes they have to switch the plane. And I was worried they'd switch the plane at the last minute. And if they do that, so then I would have, I would have a problem. So what I decided to do is I would take a plastic bag with me just in case. And in case they switch the planes, I'll put myself in a plastic bag. So Mrs. Kaplan, who happens to be the daughter of a Kohen, both my grandfathers are Kohanim. We're Kohanim. So my mother is the daughter of a Kohen. My father-in-law is a Kohen. My wife is the daughter of a Kohen. My brother's wife, my older brother's wife, is the daughter of a Kohen also, and my younger brother's wife is not. So we haven't spoken to them in 20 years. But the what do you call it? So my wife said, I cannot take a plastic bag. I said, why not? She said, because if you start on takeoff, this is shortly after 9/11 also, can you imagine on takeoff, and in an El Al plane on takeoff, and some guy is suddenly frantically putting himself inside some sort of bag. She said to me, you could start a panic on the airplane besides getting yourself shot by security people, right? So whatever Avera you're worried about, this Avera is going to be a bigger Avera. So I said, okay, what can I do? I can't go, So what I did was I sent a fax to the CEO of El Al asking for permission to put myself into a plastic bag on takeoff in case, I have to. And I get a fax back from the CEO of El Al. I get a fax back. Mr. Kaplan, you may do nothing on the plane other than securely fasten yourself into the seatbelt, and so on and so on. So Baruch Hashem, eventually what they did was, and I even spoke to Rabbi Ravitz, who was a Knesset member. Remember, Israeli Knesset. He lived upstairs from my parents. So I asked him about this. He said he had actually he showed me a fax. They contacted the aviation authority in Israel, and they said it's not to reroute some of the planes, reroute the planes to give the Kohanim. So they sent him back a fax that it's not up to them, it's up to the military. Everything in Israel, security, military. So he sent the fax he contacted the military, they sent the fax back, it's not up to them, it's up to the aviation authority. so he got ping-ponged, and he showed me the faxes that he got ping-ponged into the middle. Eventually what they did was they did reroute some of the planes, and Rav Elyashiv said that once they rerouted the planes, you could get on the plane, it's not a problem. That's what happened. Okay. Then there was another problem was created. I'm just showing you what's involved here. Another problem came up, which was what? That the bodies being brought to Israel, when a body is brought to Israel, so originally the first airport, they have two, there's Terminal 1 and Terminal 3. Okay, Terminal 1 is the old terminal. Now in the old terminal, any of you who are in Israel in the old terminal, you used to go to the old terminal, they had a bus, and the bus drove you out to the plane. So they told us all the time, and then there was usually a female soldierette, standing there looking you over as you boarded the plane. And everybody felt that this is all because of security. You got to get us as far away from the terminal building as possible, and so on. So they built Terminal 3. And Terminal 3, they then have the sleeves that attach to the planes. So it just turned out that in Terminal 1 had nothing to do with security. They just weren't capable of, it wasn't built for sleeves. Okay. So a problem came up. Somebody came up with the problem when a plane lands in Israel and it's got a body on the plane, and then the sleeve connects up to the plane. Instantaneously, you've knocked out the entire airport. Because that's how Tuma works. Tuma works instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. Boom, you hit it, and the entire airport is out for the Kohanim. Right, which became another problem. So there's a friend of mine who was actually involved in Kohanim issues. He's not a Kohen, actually. He's not a Kohen, but he's involved very much. Anytime I have questions about which flights I could take, I call this guy up. He knows all the issues of the flights. they got the airport authority to agree to allow the Chevra Kadisha, the what do you call it? They are in control. Apparently, what they do is they take the sleeve out, but they don't connect it to the plane. The Chevra Kadisha takes the body off the plane first. That's why if you ever fly into Israel on El Al, periodically an El Al plane will all of a sudden, as it's taxing coming in for it lands, and then it's taxing to where it's parking spot. Then it'll stop for a few minutes. And generally during those few minutes, that means the Chevra Kadisha is taking the body off the plane. And after the body's off the plane, then the sleeve connects up to it. Okay? So everything was fine and dandy. Until recently, somebody told me, I can't even fly into Kennedy Airport at all now. In New York, I can't fly into Kennedy, not because he was shot. I can't fly into Kennedy, not because of that too much. I can't fly into Kennedy Airport because there are El Al flights leaving from Kennedy, about 3 flights a day. Now, when those El Al flights are coming to Israel, they load the body onto the plane about an hour before the plane takes off. And the sleeve is connected to the plane about an hour before the plane takes off. That means for each plane, it's about 3 hours of Tuma that the entire airport, or at least that terminal, that section of the terminal is out of commission. So a Kohen flying into Kennedy, going into Kennedy Airport, is automatically, your most hours of the day you can't go into the airport. So, and it's interesting because the last time I booked a flight, the travel agent who works out of America, he automatically booked me to Newark. So I said to the guy, by the way, I can't fly into Kennedy. He said, look at your ticket. I didn't book you to Kennedy because I know of the problem. This is a widespread problem. This is a well-known problem now. So I can't go through Kennedy Airport. So I have to go through Newark Airport in New Jersey. Coming back to Israel, there is a flight out of Newark. There's an El Al flight out of Newark, which is the guaranteed no-body flight. So when I have flown El Al from the United States, I have to fly from Newark unless I want to start calling and hassling, which I don't want to do. So I don't do it. These are all the things that Kohanim have to be aware of when you're to go. Yeah.
So Tuma shoots directly up. It doesn't matter how high above
right.
the cemetery
That's
you are.
correct.
Wouldn't you imagine that as you're
There's
landing
no imagination
at some
here.
point you cross over?
Oh, so good. It's a good question. Somebody once asked Rabbi Yashiv that chances are when you're in New York, there are 40 Jewish cemeteries in the greater New York area. So aren't the chances there? So unless you know for sure, you don't have to worry about it. No, the height altitude does not matter. No. Wow. What were you going to ask, Ezra?
I was just pretty much going to ask. I know pretty much hazmat suits are probably not super available, but would that
What is?
hazmat suit? Would that consider
What is that? I don't even know.
Radiation, like in a nuclear facility.
Probably if you could get if it's considered a Kli, then you're going to get an hour. Is that considered a Kli or not? But listen, so that guy who was sitting on the plane, who people think this is just some sort of Haredi lunatic, he had a very good reason for doing what he was doing. There's a method to this madness. Okay, you need permission, and the plane the truth of the matter is, on a plane, you can't do anything without their permission because it's not your plane. You can't. If they say you can't do it, then you can't do it. Right, but I knew of people that do it on takeoff. Guys say on takeoff, all of a sudden, whoosh, they're tying them in, and the plane takes off, and there you go. Okay, I just wanted to give you an example. Okay, I just want to give you an example of where this extends to. Okay, now, the Torah then talks about why is Tuma? What's so bad about ritual impurity? What is it about ritual impurity that Tuma? And I saw an amazing idea, really fabulous idea. The basic idea that's given is that we want people to bury the bodies as soon as possible. Why do we want people to bury the bodies? For several reasons. The commentaries offer several reasons. Number one, the sooner the body is buried, the healing process could begin. This is a mistake. This is why in Jewish law, try to bury, sometimes you'll have the burial within a couple of hours after the death. The sooner the body is buried, the sooner the healing process could begin. If the body's around, people are simply reminded of their loss, number one. Number two, we want that the person should be remembered. People start to decompose, and then if the family sees the body in a decomposed state, so then it leaves an unpleasant reminder of the person. We want people to remember them pleasantly. Number three, there's a problem always of necromancy. People might get involved in trying to communicate with the dead. Number four, in the old days, there's a concern that people would actually use the bones of the dead to create utensils. right? Pass a spoon. I mean, Dad's elbow. That. So there was a concern, and therefore the Torah urges to bear the Tuma, because we can't become Tameh and because it affects. So knowing there's Tuma, we're going to try to bury the dead as soon as possible. That's what. Now, why is there Tuma connected to a dead body? So and therefore it's called. Why is it called Tuma? The answer is that. Let's go back to basics now. What do we know about God? We only know one thing about God. That's all God himself has told us about himself. In other words, to understand the essence of God, we can't. And all those philosophical questions about who created God and God always was there, all those, we don't. We're created with that limitation. And the classic example is trying to explain trying to say a jet engine to a 4-year-old. A 4-year-old cannot understand a jet engine. Doesn't mean the jet engine doesn't work. 4-year-old just can't understand it. He's got a limitation on his end. People have limited intellects. You can't understand everything. I took 2 weeks of analytical geometry in high school, right? And after 2 weeks, I gave it right back, right? Because there was a limit on the intellectual understanding, certainly the interest, but the intellectual understanding. I didn't understand. I didn't know what was flying. I wasn't gonna. I had better things to do. So there's a limit. The fact is that there is something called analytical geometry. The fact that I didn't understand it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has told us one thing about himself, which is, if you look at the Ramchal, if you look at Derech Hashem, we know one thing about God. And he's told us this, and that's all he's told us. And the Gemara says, Moshe Rabbeinu was given 49 gates of wisdom. There are 50 gates of wisdom, and Moshe Rabbeinu could not access the 50th gate. That means Moshe Rabbeinu had a limitation. He could, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means that he was limited. He could not access the 50th gate of wisdom. God has told us one thing about himself, which is what?
We can't understand him.
That he's also told us.
He is one.
He is Tov Umetiv. God is good and he bestows good. That's all we know about God. He's good and he bestows good. And even those things which look not good are ultimately good. And that's why in this world, when something negative happens, a person makes a Baruch Dayan HaEmes, and in the world to come, it's always going to be the Hatov Umetiv. Because in the world to come, we'll understand that it was all for the good. The one thing, the worst thing that a person confronts, shouldn't happen to anybody. A person confronts death of a relative or somebody who's close. At that point, a person entertains, whether they want to or not, at some point it crosses their mind, God's not good. That's the height of impurity. That's Tuma. Death is Tuma. Why? Because it creates in a person's mind a possible thought which is the antithesis to what God is. And therefore death is Tuma. That is the worst thing that could possibly, the worst form of impurity is to think the wrong thing of God. That's the worst form of impurity. And therefore the Torah says, what do you call it? There's that's the idea behind Tuma. Now, the Torah then goes on and puts marriage limitations. Take a look at the bottom of the page. And page 7, bottom of 672. Isha zona v'chalola lo yikachu. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who has been a harlot or a woman who has got some sort of flaw in her. For instance, a Kohen who marries a divorcee, his daughter. Kohen's not allowed to marry a divorcee. He's not allowed to marry the daughter of a Kohen who married a divorcee because she's called a chalala. V'lo yikachu v'isha grusha me'isha lo yikachu. They cannot marry a divorcee. Ki kadoshu le'elav, because the Kohen is holy. That means that the Kohen, in his personal life, he and his wife have to maintain a certain standard. Now, the problem with a zona is clear. A woman is a harlot of any sort is clear. And the problem with a chalala is also that there's a flaw in the character, in her genetic character. And even a woman who's divorced, a Kohen could marry a widow. A Kohen could marry a widow. He's not allowed to marry a divorcee. Now, there are two reasons here. A widow, for the most of the time, it's not her fault she became a widow. All right, and most of the time, it's not her fault. She became depending on how she became a widow. Winston Churchill. There was a woman in England named Lady Astor she and Winston Churchill were always going at it, and Lady Astor said to Winston Churchill, "If I was married to you, I would poison your tea." And he said, "Madame, if I was married to you, I would drink it." So that was a famous line from Winston Churchill. So a widow generally it's not her fault. She also once said to him, "My dear sir, you are disgustingly drunk." And he said, "Madame, you are disgustingly ugly, but I'll be sober in the morning." So what do you call it? A widow. Number one, a divorcee. There's an implication. It's not true all the time, probably most of the time not, because most divorces are the husband's fault, like 99% of them. But a divorcee, there is obviously something that it takes two to tango. Generally, he starts, but she continues it, and so there's number one. There's an implied divorce carries a certain stigma that widowhood does not. Number one. Number two, there's a different concern. A divorcee may have her husband still alive. A man's allowed to marry a woman whose first husband is still alive, a divorcee. And there's a concern that in their private life, she may not have her mind focused only on this husband. She may be thinking about her previous husband, which is a form of mental immorality. When a Kohen has to be pure and his wife has to be pure, they have to be at a heightened level. A widow, the Torah says that when somebody dies, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed, he built into the world's nature, into human nature, that the deceased are forgotten. It says, Hames nishtakeach min alev. Now, they're obviously not forgotten. They're not forgotten. I still remember my grandparents. I still remember people die, you still remember the people. What it means is that at the moment of death, there's a certain intensity. That intensity of pain is reduced. And the person becomes a memory. So a widow is less likely to be focused on her previous husband than a divorcee, and therefore the Torah is what he called. Therefore the Torah puts that limit, it makes that difference. A Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow. A Kohen Gadol has to marry a virgin. Is not allowed to marry a widow, a woman who's ever been with another man, because the Kohen Gadol is even at a higher level of kedusha. Now, even more than that, what happens if the Kohen does marry this widow, this divorcee? Then what happens? Take a look at the pasuk. I'll get you 1 second, Mayor. Take a look at the pasuk. Isha grusha misha leikacha ki gadol shelahav v'kidashto. 674. V'kidashto. Take a look at Rashi. You should make him holy. Says Rashi. Al korcho, against his will, by force. She'im lo rotza legaresh, if he doesn't want to divorce her, halkehu v'yasreyu ad she'yagaresh. You have to, Beis Din has to go and use corporal punishment until he does divorce her, because you have to help maintain his kedusha. Now, there are certain halachas. We have to keep all the halachas. Some halachas I'm more fond of. I shouldn't say I'm fond of it. This particular halacha, the kiddush, this also includes that the Kohen has to be honored in certain ways. That's why the Kohen gets the first aliyah. And that's why the Kohen is honored with leading the benching. And if you're sitting at a table and they're passing a platter of food around, the Kohen should be allowed to take first. Yeah, that's the one nobody. Yeah, the aliyah people give me, and the benching they let me do, but that platter never gets to me. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. That's your reaction. Like, you didn't say a word about the aliyah, you didn't say a word about what he called. All of a sudden, the food is like, whoa. Hey, you want to pass that platter? No. But you're supposed to. Even more than that. And I'll tell you halacha. This is in the Mishnah Berurah. Look at Shulchan Aruch. If you look in Kuf Chav Ches, which is the siman that talks about Birkas Kohanim, Kuf Chav Ches, Sif Katan Mem Hey, how do I know that? There's a halacha that says that Osir lihishtamesh b'kohen b'zman hazeh. You're not allowed to make use of a Kohen. You're not allowed to ask a Kohen to do you a favor. Yeah, there you go. You can't ask a Kohen to do things for you. A Kohen could do it for you if he wants to. and certainly if it's a very respectable person, but you're not allowed to ask a Kohen to do things for you. And there are poskim that say this applies to even sitting at a table say, can you please pass the salt? That you can't ask the Kohen to pass the salt. To that extent. Some say it even applies to a minor Kohen. Now, my wife, I told you she's a Bas Kohen. The fact that she's a Bas Kohen is almost insignificant because a wife takes on her husband's status. So if a wife is a Yisrael and she marries a Kohen, she could eat Truma. If a woman is a Bas Kohen and she marries a Yisrael, she can't eat Truma because only Kohanim could eat Truma. So the wife takes the Kohen status. However, I think I was married for about 2 years. I don't know why it took me so long. I was married for 2 years, and one day my wife asked me to take the garbage. All of a sudden I realized, so I said to her, I will tell you, I can tell you this conversation word for word because I remember it. It made quite an impression. I said to her, with a smile, I said, well, how does it look for me, a Kohen, to take the garbage? And she said to me, how does it look for you, a Kohen, to be single? Right? So I took the garbage. I took the garbage, and then I asked a posek why I'm allowed to. Now, I didn't have a doubt, obviously, for I could do for I didn't really have a doubt. I was more curious how he would word it. So I asked him, why am I allowed to take the garbage? So he said to me, he gave me kind of one of those looks. He knew me already. he gave me the look, and he said, listen, not all of the orange peels and eggshells in the garbage belong to her. Some of them are yours. I'm not doing it for her. It's not like you're doing her a favor and taking the garbage. You also want the garbage. I mean, if it was up to you, you'd let the garbage overflow into the living room. No, it was up to you. You also want the garbage out. So obviously you're allowed to do it. But you should know there is a halacha that you're not allowed to ask the Kohen. You're not. And I've had people who have asked me to say, somebody said, here, could you do me a favor? Could you put the sefer on the shelf? 1 second, no, you're a Kohen. Never. I've had people do that. Never, right? Because they know there's a halacha. Now I'm allowed to do it if I want to. But according to halacha, you cannot in Mishnah. You can't make it in Mishnah after Kohen. So they say, yeah, what we're going to ask back.
What happened to Pidyon Ben? That the Kohanim just offered to do
A Pidyon Ben? A Pidyon Ben is where we make some bucks. Right. There's a Pidyon. Anybody for a Pidyon Ben? If you had one, we'll do another. I got a 2-for-1 sale going today. No, Pidyon Ben is Pidyon Ben the Kohanim. That's one of the gifts.
to ask the Kohen.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Ask, please ask. For Pidyon Ben, ask anytime. Ask, tell, beg, I don't care how you do it. Yeah, 100%. You should know I've done Pidyon Bens at Ohr Somayach because there are a lot of guys. By the way, if anybody has not had a Pidyon Ben, if you're a firstborn and neither of your parents is a Kohen or a Levi, and you were a regular birth, not a C-section, so then you need a Pidyon Ben. You likely need a Pidyon Ben. It costs about, it depends on 100 grams of silver. It's somewhere between 250, 300 shekels. I had a day I did 5 Pidyon Bens here in one day. Yeah, that was a good day. Yeah, that was a good day. That was a good day. The first time I did it here, the first time years ago I did 3 in one day. That was good also. I had to buy the coins, and my wife said to me, "You're not really going to keep the money, are you?" And I sure am. And somebody even said to me, "Well, you give that money to tzedakah?" I mean, if people said to me, "Do you give the Pidyon Ben money to tzedakah?" Hey, I don't ask you what you do with your income, right? What are you asking me? Do I give my 10%? If what are you asking me what I do with my money, right? That's income, 100% income. I don't ask you you give all your income to money, to tzedakah? What are you asking me about my income for? And it's 100% kosher money. So the first time, you want to hear something, this was amazing. The first time I did it is years ago, must go back about 25 years. So I had to buy the silver coins. Cost me at the time for silver, basically, it was 110 shekels. I remember it was 110 shekels. So there were 3 guys that needed pidyons. So I told each guy, they said, how much was it? So I told them, whatever it's worth to you. So one guy gave me 50 shekels. One guy gave me 40 shekels. The third gave me 20 shekels. So it added up to 110. So I saw that as a sign from heaven that I meant to keep the money, which I did, right? What? And if it would have added up to 150, I would have found another sign from heaven. One way or another, that money was going. One way or another, that money was going right in my pocket. So because I came home, my wife said, "You're not really getting." I said, "It's a sign from heaven," right? Yeah. Go ahead. Mayor had a question. Go ahead.
And just about the
the converted woman, there's I haven't seen it in the passage, but also Kohanim are
Not allowed to marry a converted woman. Correct. A woman who's converted, a Kohen cannot marry. A Kohen cannot marry a woman who has had a relationship with a non-Jew.
But even if she hasn't and she converted before,
She's not allowed. If she converted before she's 3 years old, possibly. After 3 years old, for sure not. And a woman who has had a relationship with a non-Jew, a Kohen, even if they're not married, just a Kohen. That's why a Kohen who gets involved in a shidduch with a woman who is a balas tshuva, the shadchan has to know to check. That's not for the Kohen to check and ask questions. The shadchan has a woman has to speak to the girl first to find out whether or not she can marry a Kohen. Because if she's had a boyfriend, she's been on a college campus, had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend's not Jewish, whatever, what do you call it? So then that becomes a problem. These are the limitations, all because of the Kohen, the heightened level of kedusha that a Kohen is meant to maintain. He doesn't lose his status as a Kohen. If a Kohen is married to a divorce, it's a good question. If a Kohen is married to a divorcee, he's not allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash until he divorces her. He's not allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash until he divorces her. But he doesn't. There's no way to lose his status as a Kohen. Once he divorces her, he's reinstated. He's back as a Kohen.
but the children aren't Kohanim.
A child who's born from an illicit relationship, say a Kohen marries a divorcee, it's a valid marriage, as opposed to, let's say, a man who marries his sister. It's not even a valid marriage, right? It's not even a marriage. A Kohen, meaning that his sister could marry somebody else without getting a get from the brother. Whereas if a Kohen marries a divorcee, it is a 100% valid marriage. She is a married woman. Somebody has an affair with her, is now having an affair with a married woman. They have to get divorced. If they have children, those children are chalolim, and a chalol is essentially a non-Kohen. He has none of the limitations of a Kohen. Okay, but he is, yeah.
Can you ask a Kohen to stay at their house for Shabbos, or is that asking the Kohen?
No, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's a problem. Not sure. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. And certainly if the Kohen agrees to it, it's not a problem. I even have a Talmudic question here. Exactly where is the point of violation? Is the point of violation if you ask the Kohen to do something and he willingly does it to you, so you haven't done anything wrong. So I don't know if the point of violation is the point of asking, and I think after thinking about it, I think the point of it, if the Kohen does something for you simply because he's too embarrassed to say no, simply so I had a guy once who was a Kohen. He said to me, somebody asked him in the neighborhood. One of the Kohl guys asked him. He had to move his apartments. He wanted to know if this guy would help him. So the guy said to me, "Can I tell him I'm a Kohen and therefore I can't help him?" So I said to the guy, "Listen, if you don't want to help him because you just don't feel like helping him, just say." I can't. Don't pull Kohen. Don't pull Kohen. What do you call it on it? You know. Don't pull the Kohen card, right? You don't want to help. Now, a Lag BaOmer is also a problem to go up to Meron, because getting near the kever. There are ways for Kohanim to go. So I asked my son recently, because my son and I neither of us have been there in about 30 years. We went there once. That's twice. Our first time and our last time. So I asked my son if he ever plans on going. He says, well, his friends ask him to go. He tells them that he can't because he's a Kohen. But if it wouldn't be a Kohen, he'd find some other reason not to go. All right. Okay, see you tomorrow, guys.